Well, welcome back again this week. We see an uneasy truce has been arrived at vis-a-vis the Ukraine. In fact, the headline in this morning's Wall Street Journal says, "Doubt clouds Ukraine truce." Well, it should, because we know that those of us who've watched this over the years, that truces and treaties and agreements made between and with communist countries, and that's really what we're talking about here, rarely work, because usually these things are arrived at by the communists to give them some time to retrench. And that's really probably what's going to happen. And in addition to that, what they're basically saying is, you can keep what you've got already, just don't take any more. So it justifies what they've already done. That's sort of like saying to a child that's got its hand in the cookie jar, okay, I caught you, you can have the cookie you got in your hand, but don't take any more. Well, if that process keeps up, and that's what seems to be going on, they just keep taking more because there's no punishment, there's no responsibility, and they're liars. Communists are dishonest. They only have one goal, and that is victory. And whatever they can do to achieve that victory, however immoral, unethical, that would, they could pull the wool over people's eyes, they will do it. That's the way they operate. And so the idea that we're going to have a truce that's going to last in the Ukraine, I'm not putting my money on it. Whether it's going to go into a war, I don't think that's going to happen full scale that will involve everybody. Again, it's going to be moving towards a new world order situation. One of the things that enters into this whole idea of communists not keeping their word, and certain countries not keeping their word, whether they're communist or not, they're totalitarian, is the issue on free trade. There's an awful lot going on the Hill in Washington, D.C., promoting fast-track authority and free trade. And the thing is that you've got to step back and ask yourself, do these people honor their agreements? China has never honored its agreements. Behind the scenes, and there's a lot of documentation for this, is that every time China gets a deal, they take it out to the nth degree, if you will, and violate the spirit and nature of that agreement. When they joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization, for instance, is when they started to flood this country with all sorts of cheap and even dangerous goods, poisonous goods, killing animals and in dog and cat food, being unsafe relative to toys for our children with lead paint and all sorts of things like that. The pirating of intellectual property, the pirating of just reverse engineering products and then flooding them on the market, pretending as if they're actually made in the United States. That has actually killed people. That's true in the oil fields, for instance, and places like that. Communists do not live up to the spirit of any agreement, let alone the letter of any agreement. That's their nature. And so the idea that we're going to have free trade with communist and socialist countries is rather ludicrous from the practical side of it. And then ask yourself the question, if communists and socialists do not believe in free enterprise, why are we calling trade with them free trade? In the sense that you and I think of free trade. They do not. They do not believe in free enterprise and free trade. It's all managed, and from their viewpoint, managed by them to their advantage and to the detriment of the American people. That's just from the trade aspect of these things. We could discuss how they're building a political union and how they intend to really come in and change our whole society through these trade agreements. But just on the surface of it, think for a moment of the fact they do not believe in free enterprise, so why call these things free trade? Another thing that they do too, by the way, is that they claim to be against the bourgeoisie. Now, our own government is moving us towards socialism, is it not? I've asked that question to many, many thousands of people. I've never had anyone say, no, our government is not moving us towards socialism. It's universal agreement. If that's the case, then why are we engaged in free trade? Because it doesn't work that way. If they're moving us domestically towards socialism, they are moving us in our foreign policy towards socialism. It's the same people doing the same thing. They have the same policy, they just put different labels on it. And one of the labels that they've been using lately, which is totally in error, but people fall for it, is middle class. Somehow we're helping the middle class. You get that in all of Obama's speeches, constantly. And the Republicans, we've got to help the middle class. What does the middle class mean? Most people have never looked at what it means. It is basically, it comes from originally the French meaning of middle class, bourgeoisie. And if you read all of Marx and Engels and all the socialists, what is the class they want to eliminate? It is the bourgeoisie, the middle class. And yet we're told that their socialist policies are going to help the middle class, because they've defined it a little bit differently than they normally do. And that is, the middle class is anyone who sits in the middle of the strata of wages, but not necessarily part of the middle class. They may have a middle wage, but not be part of the middle class. What is the bourgeoisie? What is the middle class? And that is the class of entrepreneurs, the individuals with small and medium businesses who set about inventing new services, new products, and that sort of thing to be made available to the people and go into business to do so. That is the middle class, and that's the class they want to get rid of. They don't want to get rid of the upper class, and they don't want to get rid of the lower class. If you read their writings well, their theoretical writings, what's in their newspapers and that sort of thing is for the rabble. The theoretical aspect is what they want to establish in the long run, and that's to get rid of this middle base of thinkers and independent inventors and industrialists, et cetera, that open up a society to blossoming into what we see today in the United States. But it is deteriorating rapidly because we are destroying our middle class and our industrial base through these trade treaties and the trade policy of our federal government. It has reached such a point where today we are in danger of being able to defend ourselves in a world war, when 80% of the components of all of our weaponry comes from overseas now. Think about that in the way of protecting ourselves in a future war. We've decimated our steel industry and shipped it to China, where China today is the largest steel producer. Think about that in relationship to defending ourselves, when almost everything that we use in the way of weaponry contains steel. And some of it a little bit, some of it an awful lot, like tanks and trucks and ships, et cetera, et cetera. These sorts of things have been eroded through the policies of our federal government and the misuse of not only the definitions of words, but the very thinking through these somatic weapons like free trade and middle class and treaties and truces that these people never, ever uphold. They're liars. We can't do business with them, and that's the way we need to deal with them as we move forward. When we're talking about socialist and communist countries, let them collapse on their own. We don't need to have a policy of so-called trade that feeds their economy. It's that simple. Until next week, we'll see you then.